So now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Lise Alschuler. Dr. Alschuler is board certified in naturopathic oncology, and she practices naturopathic oncology in New Hampshire. She specializes in naturopathic care for patients affected by cancer and also for patients that are interested in taking steps to prevent cancer. I have read many of her books, and she is an excellent and knowledgeable author. Some of them are Definitive Guide to Cancer, Integrative Approach to Prevention, Treatment, and Healing in her most current book, 5 to Thrive, Your Cutting-Edge Cancer Prevention Plan. She is a past president of the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians, and she currently serves as Vice President of Quality and Education at Emerson Ecologics. And she has asked us to add, as an additional note in her introduction, that she herself is a cancer survivor, which I believe adds a certain level of personal interest and involvement to all of the suggestions that she makes. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Lise Alschuler. Welcome, Dr. Alschuler.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Okay, so I'm going to just jump right in. And yes, I am a cancer survivor, although my co-author Karolyn Gazella and I like to call ourselves cancer thrivers. So excuse me, we'll just go with that. So what I'd like to do today is just to give you a little bit of an overview of what I consider to be a very powerful prevention plan. And it just so happens that as you're out there preventing cancer, you're also going to be optimizing your health and wellness, as we'll see as we go through this. So there's my button. Okay, so the toll of cancer, every 60 seconds someone dies of cancer in this country, and you know, the trend, or the rate of diagnoses is really just getting worse. At the current rate, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women in their lifetimes will experience cancer, will be diagnosed with this disease. And the number of diagnoses are expected to increase by 45% over the next 20 years. That's in part because our population is older, living longer, and cancer tends to occur in the latter third of our life. So there's just more people around to get cancer. It's also certainly true that there are some lifestyle and behavioral things that we do that are contributing to our risk, and the environment is somewhat carcinogenic. So really the key true is to get more prevention, or more treatment, and to effectively reverse this disease. But I think the actual ultimate key is to reverse the trend altogether by instituting more prevention. So that's really what this talk is about, is about cancer prevention. And as Karolyn, as Cheryl mentioned, there's a lot of cancer stories. Some of you listening may have a cancer diagnosis yourself. I certainly do. My story started actually with my father, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he was given a very poor prognosis of about 3 months, and he ended up living actually 17 months. But probably what was most important about those 17 months is that he lived really well, very healthfully. And as you'll see a little bit later, part of the idea of prevention is to institute health regardless of what diagnoses we may be carrying around. So shortly after my father's death, about 2 years after he died, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent an integrative approach of conventional treatments as well as integrative treatments, and I'm now still on hormonal treatment, but cancer-free, and feeling good. So with that being said, you know, there's certainly a pervasive sense of fear around cancer, and in fact, I don't know anybody who's been diagnosed with this disease that doesn't have significant fear around the diagnosis, around what that means to their longevity, and so it's important to really recognize and to give some room for fear to be a part of this experience. And in reality, you know, if you think about fear, what we're afraid of is we're afraid of losing our life. We're afraid of losing our day-to-day living, our vitality. And so in a sense, fear is actually an expression of our desire to live. And if we can remember that fear is just the flip side of a coin that's really reflective of our vitality and our wholeness and our wellness, then it can help to reframe fear, and it can help us to control fear rather than fear control us. And so I always talk to my patients about doing a deep dive into life and using fear as the motivator to get into the water. And it's really when we go to the bottom of that ocean, the bottom of our own life, that we can find the treasures that are hidden there. And then we can bring those treasures up and really experience a richness that perhaps we didn't even know we were capable of experiencing. So this is just, I like to start with this because I think it's important to remember when we're dealing with cancer that this is a very profound disease, and the implications for health and true wellness are quite profound as well. And that is really what hope is all about. And so really, instead of, or even though we might fear cancer and we might fear, treatment and of cancer and all the things that go with it, and that can be overwhelming and we can feel out of control, that there's always hope. And, we just have to give ourselves room to expect the unexpected. And maybe somehow in the course of this disease, people will actually discover a greater sense or depth of wellness that they didn't even know they had before. So cancer prevention. Cancer prevention really in our, and when I say our, I'm talking about my co-author Karolyn Gazella and I, when we speak about cancer prevention, when we write about cancer prevention, we are talking about reducing the risk of cancer so that the likelihood of being diagnosed with the disease is less. But we're also talking about this idea about being the healthiest person that you can possibly be, even if you do develop cancer. And so we have this little slide here with two horses. Now the horse on the, I guess it would be on your left, looks a little old, a little wobbly, and will probably get you to the end of your journey, but it's going to be a rough ride. The horse on the right looks pretty svelte, looks pretty fit, and that's going to be a much faster, much more pleasant journey. So both horses will get you there, but which one would you rather ride? And that's really what we're trying to convey conceptually, is that if you do get diagnosed, you're going to be on a journey regardless. So it's going to be a lot better for you if you're in a healthy body on that journey, and you'll have the opportunity to experience health throughout the course of the disease. When I was myself getting treated with, for my breast cancer, when I was getting chemotherapy, I always felt like I was a healthy person getting chemotherapy, or a healthy person receiving radiation therapy, and now a healthy person with hormonal therapy. So I think it's, possible to really achieve a great deal of health throughout the course of this disease. And so the question, of course, then is, well, okay, how do we get there? And one of the ways that we believe we can get there is by influencing what we call 5 key bodily pathways, because these 5 pathways we've discovered through our review of the research are almost like the super highways of influence on how our genes express themselves towards health and away from disease, or vice versa. So the health of these 5 pathways really becomes a critical way to influence our health all the way down to a genetic level, and I'll go into this in a little bit more. So the 5 key pathways are, drum roll please, here they are. So we have the immune system, we have inflammation, we have insulin resistance, we have digestion and detoxification, hormonal influence, and all of these and the health of each of these affect one another, and they also will affect the health of our bodies, either, again, towards cancer or away from cancer, towards health or away from health. So let's go into that a little bit more. So if you think about immunity and how we travel the path of immunity, whoops, that's a little arrow there. So Jennifer, I'm not sure how to make the animations work. They worked before, but if you have an idea, I'm open to it. Otherwise, I'll just kind of talk through this so that we don't spend too much time. Basically, this is supposed to be an animated slide. And what?
Hi, Lise. If you just click your right arrow, it should keep your animation going.
Click my right. Oh, my right arrow.
Like you're going to advance the slide. There.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I'll go away now.
All right. So if we travel the path of immunity, what that gets us to is how we travel the path of immunity will determine how well we defend ourselves against, obviously, invading pathogens, but also how well we can defend ourselves against malignant transformed cells from growing and eventually overtaking our healthy tissues. So the immune system is a really critical pathway in helping to protect our bodies from the development of cancer. Now, this is there's a lot more that I could say about the immune system, but let me just say this, that the role of the immune system is complex with regards to cancer. One of the things that cancer does, even at an early stage, is it develops certain characteristics that kind of stun the immune system into non-reactivity, and the cancer cells also camouflage themselves biochemically away from immune cell recognition. So it's unfortunately not quite as simple as just having a super strong immune system and being able to defeat cancer, because there's a lot of other things at play. Having said that, the immunity is still really important in the sort of day-to-day surveillance and maintenance. We're all developing cancer cells right now as I speak, and the only reason we're all not developing tumors, hopefully, is because those cells are either non-compatible with survival and they're killing themselves, or our immune systems are seeing them and destroying them. So immunity is certainly quite important. The next pathway that we travel down and how we travel is the inflammation pathway. So inflammation is kind of an interesting concept as well, and what we're really talking about in relation to cancer is chronic inflammation. So what we know is that when tissue is chronically inflamed, there's a lot of chemical messengers that are secreted by the cells in that tissue that influence the milieu of that area, and the chemicals that are secreted in a state of chronic inflammation are all the chemicals that trigger cell growth, trigger blood vessel development, and basically turn on cells to divide. So if you have a malignant cell population within an inflamed tissue, you're actually going to trigger the growth of that malignant or cancerous cell. So inflammation becomes a very critical thing to look at, and I'm actually of the opinion that everyone who has cancer has some degree of chronic inflammation, and it's less evident in certain cancers, but it's very important to both assess and then address. And we're going to get into some strategies around all this in a moment. The next pathway is the hormonal pathway, and hormonal pathway is really, in regards to cancer, speaking about certain hormones that if they become imbalanced or there's excessive amount of them, can serve as growth signals for cells, abnormal growth signals. And we're speaking specifically of two kind of categories of hormones. One are stress hormones. So when we're under chronic stress, we actually directly feed the growth of malignant cells. And certain hormones like estrogen and testosterone can also feed various cancer cells. So it's important to really look at hormonal balance. And then the fourth pathway is insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is an important concept. Some of you may have heard the phrase "cancer feeds" or "sugar feeds cancer," and that's somewhat true. But there's a kind of a middle part to that story, which doesn't often get told, which is that when people eat a diet that's high in processed carbohydrates, and perhaps they don't exercise very much, and maybe they don't sleep enough, and they have a little extra weight, they're likely to have a pre-diabetic condition called insulin resistance. So their blood sugar levels are going up, and at the same time, their insulin levels are going up in their blood. Insulin is a chaperone for sugar. So normally it escorts sugar from the blood into the cell. So when you have a lot of blood sugar, you need a lot of insulin to escort the sugar into the cell. But the cells kind of figure out after a while if there's too much sugar, they're like, hey, you know what, there's way too much going on out there, I don't need all that sugar, and they become resistant to the insulin. So they don't let the insulin escort the sugar into the cell. And when that happens, you build up more and more glucose or sugar in your blood and more insulin. Now, if you have in your body a malignant cell group growing, a tumor growing, tumor cells are really hungry for sugar. They need a lot of it because they don't metabolize it very efficiently. So one of their strategies is that they have studded their surface with insulin receptors. They're just covered with them. So even if your normal cells are a bit insulin resistant, there's always going to be plenty of insulin receptors on your cancer cells that will happily take up that insulin. So you preferentially start to feed your cancer cells in a state of insulin resistance. And to make matters even worse, when the insulin binds to that insulin receptor on the cancer cell, it acts like a key in the ignition switch of the cancer cell, and it actually turns on that cancer cell to begin dividing. And so insulin is a direct growth factor for cancer. So insulin resistance is a very serious cancer prognostic state. And then the last pathway is digestion and detoxification, and this encompasses both our ability to digest and absorb cancer-fighting nutrients from our food, and it also encompasses the health of our detoxification pathways, which exist throughout all of our cells, but primarily in our liver, and we are come into contact now with so many cancer-causing substances, toxins, if you will, that we need to be really able and efficient at detoxifying those so that they don't in turn start a process of cell damage and cancer. So detoxification is really important. So these 5 pathways are really the most highly influential pathways towards or away from cancer development. And the way that they do that is in part by influencing the expression of our DNA. So this is where it gets kind of interesting, because this is where the science of epigenetics is really helping us to understand how the way we live our lives actually affects how we express ourselves on a very core level. So if you think about your DNA, which is, inside a double-coiled helix inside each of your cells, if you think about your DNA as being an instruction book, and depending on each page has a specific set of instructions that will determine a particular activity essential for life. And if you have that book open on a certain page and it's sort of stuck open, then that instruction is going to be read a lot, and you're going to do a lot of whatever that instruction says. On a genetic level, that means that the genes that are in that part of the DNA that are kind of open are being read a lot, and you're going to make a lot of those proteins or those activities. On the other hand, if you were to take a paperclip and clip some pages together, the instructions within the paperclip pages will not be read, and you won't be able to make whatever instructions that you won't be able to make the results of those instructions. So again, on a genetic level, what that means is if you have your DNA and you put paperclips along your DNA, which are called methyl groups, if you put paperclips along your DNA, the genes that are underneath those methyl groups or those paperclips can't be read. And on the other hand, if you pull the paperclips off and you leave that part of the DNA kind of relaxed, then those instructions get overread. And what happens in cancer is that we tend to put paperclips on the genes that would otherwise cause cell repair proteins to be made. So when we are looking at a cancerous DNA, it's what we call hypermethylated, or it's got a lot more paperclips than it should on the genes that would otherwise repair damage. At the same time, where there should be paperclips on genes that are called cancer promoter genes, those paperclips are pulled off. So the cancer promoter genes are overread. And how and when we place those paperclips on and off the DNA is determined by how we live our life, and specifically the health of our immune system, our inflammation, insulin resistance, hormonal balance, etc. So it's really the health in those 5 pathways that determines the placement of the paperclips, which in turn determines how we read our DNA. So I know that's a little bit complicated, but hopefully you're following enough that we can continue on and see how that actually makes sense. So this is just really kind of summarized on this slide. So epigenetic research suggests that cancer is the result both of mutated genes. That's when the instructions themselves, there's a misprint or a typo and the instructions aren't quite what they should be, and also mutated gene expression. That's the placement of those paperclips. And specifically with regards to cancer, in a cancerous cell, the tumor suppressor and cell repair genes are shut down. They're silenced. And the tumor promoter genes are overexpressed. And the result of those 2 things is that cell division goes wild, and these malignantly, and these cells divide so fast and so rapidly they can't even keep up with their rate of cell division. and they start to get more and more abnormal with each cell division, and that, in essence, is cancer. So influencing these changes is really at the heart of cancer prevention and treatment. And just to illustrate how important this is, even in people who have what's called the BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene mutation, so these are people that have a mutation in a gene called BRCA1 or a gene called BRCA2. These are cell repair genes. And when people have a mutation in these genes, they don't repair cell damage very well at all. So their lifetime risk of cancer is very high. In some people, it can be as high as almost an 80% lifetime risk of cancer. But even in people with those mutations, those that eat more fruits and vegetables and also maintain a normal weight, in other words, prevent getting obese, lower their lifetime risk of cancer. So what that's saying is that even when the gene itself is mutated, how you live your life can still influence the behavior of your genes by changing where those paper clips are placed, and in turn influence your risk of cancer. So this really is a very powerful concept. This means that we are that our genes are not just a blueprint that's going to determine who and how we live our life. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. What this is really telling us is how we live our life influences ourselves on a very deep genetic level. Okay, so back to the pathways. So basically, our genes are not our destiny, and that the health of our pathways influence how our genes behave, and that gives us both the opportunity but also the responsibility to make choices that will influence our genetic expression towards health. And this is a very important point, because with each choice that we make, we're choosing to do or not to do things that will influence our health on a genetic level, and therefore we really do hold the key to our own health, which is mostly an empowering statement. So this, in essence, is what we call the 5 to Thrive plan, and it's basically the idea that there are 5 key areas of life that in turn influence these 5 key pathways most significantly. And this is all summarized very quickly, and I'm going to go through some examples in each of these 5 areas. So we speak about diet and the importance of diet in influencing the health of those 5 key bodily pathways, which in turn influence the health and expression of our genes. We talk about how spirit has influence on that, movement or exercise, dietary supplements, and rejuvenation. So I'm going to go through some examples of each of these pathways, and there's a lot more than I have time to go through, so this is just kind of to give you a taste of how we can use all of these 5 areas to influence each of those 5 pathways. So let's start with exercise, and movement is really important. If pressed, and I was told you can only have one tool to help prevent cancer, what would it be? My answer would be exercise. More than diet, more than anything else, which might surprise you, but the research on exercise is really quite compelling, and exercise, it just has such dramatic influence on these 5 pathways. So exercise, as we know, gives us the breath of life, literally. It oxygenates our tissue, and we use oxygen to make energy. So when we exercise, we have more energy, we have more vitality, and we feel better. So it just, for no other reason, we'll feel good when we exercise. And we also want to make sure that when we're exercising, we're doing it with a sense of joy and exuberance. This is Karolyn, my co-author's horse, named Bo, and she made me promise that every time I gave a presentation about this, I had to show a picture of her horse. So with the help of some good work by Jennifer, we got this picture on here, and this is actually an important picture too, because you can see this horse is running happily. This is a happy, galloping horse, and this is the attitude with which you all should move and exercise. Because if you exercise but you're grumpy about it and it's a pain and you just don't like it, you're sending very mixed messages to your cells, and you're going to actually end up diminishing the benefit of exercise to some extent. So it's important to really find exercise that's fun, that you like, and that's why we sometimes don't even call it exercise, and we just talk about it as movement, because dancing and playing drums rigorously and hiking, all that stuff counts, and that can be really fun. So why is exercise so important? And again, these are just some examples of the impact of exercise. There's lots and lots more, but I just wanted to illustrate the impact, at least one impact, on each of the 5 key pathways from exercise. So first of all, the immune system. When you exercise regularly, you increase the activity of some special immune cells called natural killer cells and cytotoxic T cells. These are the special elite forces of your immune system. These are the immune cells that head out into the jungle and seek out the enemy cancer cells and destroy the cancer cells before the tumor grows. These are really important cells for preventing cancer. The more active these cells are, the greater likelihood we have to experience health and the lower our risk for all cancers. So exercise increases the activity of these cells. We also know that regular exercise lowers inflammation, particularly chronic inflammation, and that's actually measurable by certain blood markers that can be tested, such as C-reactive protein and homocysteine. These are chemicals that are secreted in your blood, and when you have chronic inflammation, in many cases those molecules will be in high levels in your blood. So if you have high C-reactive protein and high homocysteine, you can be pretty sure that there's some degree of chronic inflammation going on, and it's interesting to see if you start a regular exercise program, more often than not, you'll see those markers start to go down. Exercise also impacts the hormonal system in a lot of ways, and one of the ways that it does that is that it improves the sensitivity of the feedback loops in the stress response. So just very briefly, the stress response is a very finely tuned and orchestrated event of hormones that are secreted, they're taken up by other glands, and that response typically lasts for a very short period of time and then it's shut down so that we're not under chronic stress all the time. And over time, though, if we're in the face of things that we experience as stressful day in, day out, that very finely tuned system loses its sensitivity, and we start to allow those stress hormones to creep up, and they never are told to shut down. And exercise reinstates that sensitivity so that we can regain a better balance, a tighter control of our stress response. And then the fourth pathway that exercise influences is insulin resistance. I would go so far as to say that if somebody has some degree of insulin resistance, they must exercise regularly in order to reverse it. That any plan to reverse insulin resistance that does not include regular exercise will not be ultimately successful. So it's really critical to reducing insulin resistance. And then finally, people that exercise regularly have much healthier digestive systems. They have more regular bowel movements. They actually absorb more nutrients from their food. And importantly, exercise upregulates a lot of the detoxification pathways so that we are better able to process some of the environmental toxins that we're exposed to. So hopefully you can see that exercise is really important. So of course you might be asking yourself, well, how much exercise do I have to do to get all these good benefits? And the answer really is that the key, and this has been shown now in many different studies looking at all sorts of different endpoints, that the benefit of exercise is consistently seen when people exercise at least 3 hours each week, which is about 30 minutes, 6 days a week. And the level of exercise should be moderately brisk walk or a little bit more, but moderately brisk walk, equivalent of that, 30 minutes a day, 6 days a week, you will get these benefits from exercise. More is better, but that's plenty. And, we have a picture here of a woman lifting weights, and that's specifically to encourage women to do weight exercises and resistance training because the muscles are very metabolically active tissue, and the stronger and more firm muscles are, the less insulin resistant you are, the less inflamed you'll be, and the better health you'll have overall. So it's really important for women to make sure that their muscles are firm and that they're exercising both their muscles and their cardiovascular system. And men too, of course, but I think men seem to be more inclined that way to begin with. Okay, so moving into diet, you know, there's lots and lots of cancer prevention diets that are recommended out there, and so I want to just start by saying that one size does not fit all, but I will say that there are some basic principles that do seem to apply to nearly everyone, and this is best summarized in a study that came out just this year that looked at the diets of over 111,000 non-smoking adults, and they found that those adults that maintained a healthy body weight, that emphasized vegetables and fruits on a daily basis, that limited their alcohol consumption, that exercised regularly, they had an overall risk reduction of dying from cancer by 30% in men and 24% in women. So those are kind of the basic bottom line core dietary principles and the sort of effect that you'll see from that. Now, more specifically, the diet that I recommend is really not anything extreme, and the reason for that is the research, to the best of my ability to do research, I have not found research that supports really extreme cancer prevention diets. There are certainly benefits for some people in eating kind of extreme, very restricted diets that may be separate or unique to that person. So I'm not discounting the value of those diets for some people, but generally speaking, if you want to just, if you're asking yourself the question, well, how should I eat to increase my health and lower my risk of cancer? My answer would be these 5 things. Number 1, consume sufficient calories but not excessive calories. We all overeat, and just a good example of that is if you were to go to a very fine steakhouse and order a steak and they brought back this plate, and on the plate there was a piece of the finest steak that was the size of a deck of cards, you would say, what is going on? Like, hey, where's my steak? And in reality, that deck of cards is about the serving size that most of us need on a per meal basis. But typically what you would get is a steak that's probably 3 or 4 times that size. And so our whole sense of portions has really become very skewed. And when we start eating more per meal, it takes more to make us feel full. So this is something that's very important for us to address, and it takes a little time and slowly but surely pulling back your portions. There's lots of tools now available on the web and on smartphones that can help you figure out how many calories you're eating and how many calories you should be eating and how to cut them back. Definitely encourage you to look into that. So sufficient calories and not excessive is the first principle. The second is to eat a colorful diet, and by that I mean lots of fruits and vegetables. The compounds in colorful fruits and vegetables that provide that color are polyphenols, and polyphenols are a very broad group of compounds that are found in plants that have very potent effects in us, and not the least of which is they have direct anti-cancer effects. So the more fruits and vegetables we eat, the more anti-cancer compounds we're ingesting. And you don't actually need a lot. There's, in fact, some very interesting research that has told us that just the amounts you get through your diet, if you eat 5 to 7 servings of vegetables and 2 to 3 servings of fruit on a daily basis, you're going to get a fairly small amount of flavonoid per meal, but throughout the day, that cumulative total amount will actually have significant impact on your health and your DNA expression. Third is to eat a whole foods diet. So really, this is encouraging people to eat foods that look as much like they did when they were growing in the ground or walking on the earth as possible. So avoiding processed foods, but really making sure that we expand our dietary horizons to include whole grains, seeds, nuts, lean proteins, fruits, vegetables. Because of all those foods have cancer-fighting compounds, they have anti-inflammatory compounds, and we'll get into some examples. And then the fourth principle is to emphasize plant and marines, which includes fish and algae-based sources of fat. These fats or essential fatty acids are very important immune stimulating anti-inflammatory compounds. And then the fifth is to reduce or eliminate altogether refined, processed, and packaged foods. If it's in a plastic package and it looks tan and it has lots of words that you can't pronounce, chances are it's just really not healthy. And in fact, it might even contain cancer-causing compounds. So avoiding processed foods is quite important as well. So just again, some examples is just a brushstroke view of how diet can impact the 5 pathways. If you consume these essential fatty acids from fish, nuts, seeds, you will increase your immunity, and particularly that natural killer cell and cytotoxic immunity that I mentioned earlier. If you eat a colorful diet with all those naturally occurring polyphenols that I mentioned, they are very potent anti-inflammatory agents, and probably on a scale from, if you were to weigh polyphenols against, kind of your standard antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E, the polyphenols would be much more powerful in their antioxidant, anti-inflammatory effects. Whole grains from a whole foods diet have a lot of impact on the body, and one is on the hormonal system. And when you eat a whole grains diet, the whole grains contain compounds in them called lignans, and phytosterols, which actually help to bind and eliminate excess hormones. So they pull those hormones into your stool, and then you can eliminate them, as opposed to allowing those to recirculate back into the blood. And then if you reduce your intake of saturated fat, which is often found in processed packaged foods, then you'll reduce your insulin resistance. There's a very direct link between saturated fat intake and insulin resistance. So a lot of people think insulin resistance, pre-diabetic, must be about sugar. That's true, but it's also about saturated fat. And then finally, if you avoid processed foods, you will reduce the ingestion of synthetic compounds which disrupt the hormonal balance in our body and also disrupt the ability of our body to efficiently detoxify some of the other cancer-causing compounds that we might be coming into contact with, because a lot of these processed packaged foods take up a lot of effort to just detoxify, and if our liver's working hard on those foods, it's less available to deal with cancer-causing carcinogens that are also coming in. Okay, so that's just kind of an overview of diet, and basically, in addition to what to eat, it's really important to enjoy eating, and eating should be a nourishing experience. Eating should utilize all 5 of your senses. When you eat, if the food you're eating has no smell and it doesn't look very nice, then it's probably not really maximizing the nutrients that you can get from food and that sense of being nourished. When you sit down to a meal, first of all, sit down to a meal, and then allow yourself to smell the aroma of the food. That actually begins the digestive process. And when you look at food and appreciate how it looks, that also creates nervous reflexes that stimulate the digestive tract and get it ready to digest the food. There's a lot of traditions that include touching the food and using your hands to eat, and certainly using the sense on your tongue to really feel the food in addition to tasting the food is important. And then some foods actually make noise when you eat them, and that's another way to engage your senses. Eating should be very sensual, which means that it should engage all 5 of your senses. And when that happens, then you're not only giving yourself nutrients, but you're also really nourishing yourself on a very deep level. Okay, so the next pathway is rejuvenation, and this is we have kind of a unique, I think, perspective on rejuvenation, and this really is at the basis. This is about not just wanting to prevent cancer, but is about wanting to live a healthy life, or living life with vitality, so that our goal is health, not just the goal being avoid disease. It's a very different perspective on how we approach life, and I think an important one. And so we have 5 R's of rejuvenation, and this, by the way, is a picture of my dog Nora and my little nephew. So the first R is rhythm, and rhythm is about regaining our synchronicity with our circadian rhythms. Each of our cells has a little biological clock in it, which are kind of specialized cells that sync up with the night and the daytime, which means that our bodies are programmed to do certain things at night and certain things during the day. And if we get out of sync with that rhythm, then we affect the ability of our body to function optimally. So it's really important to live in rhythm with pretty much our night and day cycle. The second R is rest, And I can't stress enough the importance of sleep, both in terms of quality and quantity. Most Americans don't get enough sleep. They either don't stay in bed long enough or they don't get good quality sleep when they are in bed. It's really important. Most people need about 8 hours of sleep a night. And so this is something that, and as we'll see, an example of this lack of sleep effects just really can unravel, in fact, our health, unravels the health of all those 5 key pathways. It's really very important. In addition to sleep, we also need to relax and really make sure that we have in our daily schedule some good stress management techniques. So this can include anything from making sure that we have some downtime, we have some pet playtime, we have some time with our kids, we enjoy, a glass of tea in the sunshine, whatever it is, we need to make sure that we get some downtime, some stress management time. And then we want to replenish ourselves, and this is really where, kind of accessing our creative self and making sure that we are engaged in life creatively, in whether it's through artwork or appreciating music or appreciating nature, something that engages our other way of looking at the world. And then finally, our 5th hour is rehydration, and this is really just to keep ourselves with optimal water quality and quantity, because if we get dehydrated, then we start to, again, put into disrepair all of those 5 pathways. So some quick examples of the impact of the rejuvenation on the 5 pathways. Feeling happy and feeling creative actually increases our immune function. There's been some fascinating studies on this. People who watch a funny video will upregulate the activity of at least 27 genes in our natural killer cells, which together increase the activity of the natural killer cell for up to 4 hours after that funny video. So it's, how we feel on a mood basis actually impacts a lot of what's going on in our body, including our immune system. People who are under a lot of stress, and a good example of that are caregivers. Caregivers as a group have some of the highest stress levels of any group, and caregivers under high stress have a greater expression of inflammatory genes. There's one here that's called NF-kappa B that's considered kind of the gateway or the master inflammatory gene. When NF-kappa B is active, it releases or increases the activity of a number of inflammatory genes. And conversely, when you relax, even when caregivers relax, the activity of those inflammatory genes decreases. So relaxation will help to reduce inflammation. Hormonal balance. If we drink water, which we do want to do to stay hydrated, we want to make sure that we don't drink water out of plastic bottles, because a lot of the plastic bottles have hormonally active bisphenols, which are used as plasticizers to keep the plastic soft, but they are hormonally disruptive. Now, there's certain bottles that have a 1 on the bottom you can drink out of once, but generally speaking, if you're using a water bottle, you want it to be ceramic or metal or glass, to make sure you're avoiding excessive exposure to plasticizers. And then, as I mentioned earlier, rest is so important, and even one night of being sleep deprived, so if you were to just get 4 hours, if you were to get 4 hours of sleep or less, in one night you would actually develop some degree of insulin resistance the next day. People who are chronically sleep deprived, 6 hours or less a night, will actually have chronic insulin resistance. So sleep is very important to manage insulin and blood sugar regulation. And then the last is digestion detoxification, and this is where living in rhythm is really important. The liver is most active at night, really early in the morning, between about the hours of 1 and 3 a.m. So if we're staying up too late, we're not in a good deep sleep at that time, we're going to compromise the ability of our liver to detoxify. So it's an example of why living in rhythm is so important. Okay, dietary supplements. Dietary supplements create really precise epigenetic changes. I consider these kind of very like the prongs on a fork that just manipulate things very precisely. And they are really important, but they really rest, if you were to think of a 3-legged stool, on top, and the legs of the stool have to be there first, which is diet, movement, and spirit. And then when you have those in place, you have the stool that you can build, and then supplements can be put in. So supplements never replace lifestyle, but they certainly can complement lifestyle. And We have 5 key dietary supplements that we have found through the research to have the most generally applicable cancer risk reduction capability. And these are omega-3 fatty acids, probiotics, which are the beneficial bacteria, polyphenols, which are those pigmented, colorful pigments in fruits and vegetables, antioxidants, and vitamin D. So I'm going to go through these and just give you an example of these supplements on each of the pathways. Glutathione is an example of an antioxidant that, again, increases those natural killer cells and cytotoxic T cells. And we make glutathione, but because we're in such an oxidatively stressful world, we tend to not make enough to compensate for that oxidative stress. So taking a dietary supplement of glutathione or its precursors can be a very helpful way to increase our defenses and, in so doing, increase our cytotoxic immunity. Omega-3 fatty acids as a supplement are very important. They actually will change the genetic expression in our cells in such a way that decreases inflammation. So omega-3 fatty acids are directly anti-inflammatory in this epigenetic way. And then hormonal balance, interestingly, probiotics. The beneficial bacteria that we take, we often think about them for digestive health, but it's actually true that when you take probiotics and rebalance the flora in your gut, you will change your mood. And people who are depressed and irritable and anxious will have less irritability, less anxiety, less depression when they have the right bacteria in their gut. And that is a kind of a complicated pathway to explain, so I'll just leave it at that. But just know that, you know, each of these dietary supplements actually does impact every single one of these 5 pathways. And here's an example of how probiotics impact the hormonal pathway. Vitamin D, so important. High levels of vitamin D is correlated with lower risk of almost every cancer known, and through lots of different mechanisms, one of which is that vitamin D is inversely correlated with insulin resistance. So if you have adequate vitamin D, you're less likely to be insulin resistant. And that means, again, your risk of cancer is going to be less. And then finally, these flavonoids, green tea, curcumin, and other flavonoids are very important in supporting detoxification. They're potent antioxidants, and they really do protect our cells from the oxidative damage that they otherwise might encounter. So the last kind of area is this area of spirit, and we have a couple of quotes here that we'll share with you. One is by Wayne Dyer, which is, begin to see yourself as a soul with a body rather than a body with a soul. And this is really important, I think, towards not only overall health, but this goes a long way towards establishing your connection with why you want to live and why you want to prevent cancer in the first place. And this is about finding community and really developing a sense of being socially connected. People that are isolated fare worse when they're diagnosed with cancer, and they have poor prognoses. And so it's really important to make sure that you find a community and stay connected with your community. Laughter, so important. I mentioned that study earlier of the funny video, upregulating those 27 genes that control our immune cell. There's so many benefits to laughter. Just the act of laughing, even if there's nothing funny that crosses your path today, just go and shut yourself in some private room and just laugh for no good reason, and that will institute the same effects. Gratitude, there's some fascinating studies that the experience of being grateful stabilizes our DNA, and this is, I don't have enough time to really explain this, but let me just suffice it to say that when we are in a state of gratitude, our DNA is more protected against being damaged. And it's fascinating, and there's just some really interesting research now that's coming out both with regards to gratitude and the next one, optimism. People who are more optimistic are less likely to develop certain diseases because their DNA is more protected. And then finally, getting real, being true to ourselves, and really being authentic is so important. If we're not authentically who we are in this world, then we will be in chronic stress. And as we know, that will begin to unravel our health. we are not human beings on a spiritual journey. We are spiritual beings on a human journey by Stephen Covey. And really it's the spirit of that's within each of us that is the spark that keeps our soul's flame lit, as we say. And it's that spirit, that connection to the life force within and around us that drives us to seek a life that is worth living, which is a life that includes being of service, a sense of peace and appreciation, time for some silence, appreciation of nature, community, and most importantly, love. And that's really ultimately what we feel is important to convey in terms of cancer prevention and health optimization. So I know I've gone through this rather quickly, and there's a lot in here, but you know, not to promo the book too much, but there's this and more in the 5 to Thrive book, which is available all over. So we have I tried to finish a little bit early, and I think I made it. So we have about 10 minutes. If anybody has questions, I'm more than happy to try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alschuler. I learned so much with that, and I really appreciate your sharing time with us. We already have some questions that have come through via our queue. The first one is, when you were speaking earlier, you were talking about cancer cells hiding, and that the immune system can be very, very strong, but that does not always mean that you're not creating cancer cells, or they may not be able to find the cancer cells. Is there a way to train immune cells to find cancer cells, or is that impossible?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, and it's a complicated answer, so let me try to simplify this a little bit and say that I guess the shortest answer is yes, to some extent. We can train the immune system, and a lot of that training has to do with upregulating that cytotoxic natural killer cell activity that I've been mentioning throughout this presentation. The more we upregulate those cells, the better chance we have of breaking through the defenses that the cancer cells throw up. And if we are supporting the cytotoxic immunity and at the same time reducing some of the chronic inflammation, that combination seems to be the sort of the magic combination that can break through this camouflaging that cancer can create. I will say, though, that it's not, the success from this approach is not 100%. There are certainly people that have good immune systems and they're not chronically inflamed, and they still can't break through that defense from the cancer cell. But if there's a way to do it, it's through that, increasing cytotoxic immunity and decreasing inflammation.
Here's another question that goes along a little bit with that first one, having to do with the cells themselves. If a breast cancer cell is still a breast cell, how does the immune system know which one to destroy?
Yeah, another great question, and in fact, that's one of the reasons why cancer cells can hide themselves from our immune system, because when our immune cells are developing, any immune cells in the course of development that attack our own cells are deleted. They're discarded because the body in its wisdom knows that's not going to be compatible with survival. So only the immune cells that kind of grow up, if you will, blind to our own other cells are the ones that survive. And that means that our immune cells are handicapped right from the get-go because cancer cells are our own cells. Now, it's also true that as a cancer cell starts to develop more and more into its tumor character, it becomes a tumor, so there's more cell division, there's a greater collection of cells. The genetic and what we call phenotypic, which is the sort of the structure of those cells, becomes distinct enough from our own cells that they actually are quite distinct. And so they lose a lot of their selfness and become much more other. And that kind of, again, opens up in a window of opportunity for our immune system to recognize those cells and attack them.
You know, we're putting you through the science hoops today, Dr. Alschuler, because here's another question on that. When you said that the immune system from the beginning learns not to attack self, then are people who have autoimmune diseases in which the body is attacking itself have more ability to kill cancer cells? Is there any correlation?
There is a little bit of a correlation. So there is a little bit of a correlation. So people who develop autoimmune cells, depending on the immune system balance, people who are prone to autoimmune disease are less prone to cancer and vice versa. So there is that. So there is some truth to that. However, it's, again, not quite as simple as that, because autoimmune disease has to do with a different kind of arm of the immune system, if you will.
Sure.
And so that arm of the immune system, the dysregulation is there, and that can occur in a way that is really kind of almost independent of our susceptibility to cancer. So I don't know if I made that more confusing or less, but
I think it's an interesting idea to explore. So thank you for sharing that with us. This is now we're jumping from cells to water bottles. Regarding water, when you talk about not purchasing water in plastic bottles, or do you mean never buy water in plastic bottles, or don't refill a plastic water bottle?
Yeah, you know, in the perfect world, never, and nobody lives in the perfect world, myself included. So, you know, when I'm traveling, for example, or I'm at a meeting somewhere else, I drink out of a plastic water bottle, but I prefer not to, and I think whenever we have the opportunity not to drink out of plastic, we should, and most certainly plastic water bottles, particularly the ones that we buy everywhere in convenience stores, et cetera, should never be used to refill. Those are made to, they're not made to last, basically, and so they should not be used more than once, for sure.
Excellent. All right, here's a long question. Can you address all of the excess testing for cancer and tests that pick it up before our immune system has had a chance to clear it? For example, it might have been able to clear it if it were left alone before the cancer industry starts people on traditional chemoradiation, et cetera. In adding to this questioner's point, we have seen a lot in the news lately about pulling back on the way that we look, for example, at prostate cancer exams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, this is a good question, and I think it's a question that is really different depending on the kind of cancer we're talking about. So prostate cancer and some types of breast cancer are very different than other cancers because they're slow-growing cancers. Prostate cancer is particularly unique in that most prostate cancer is diagnosed in a man's later years when the natural growth rate of the cancer is going to, be so long that he's likely to die from other causes rather than the cancer. So the value of diagnosis and early diagnosis even is different in that kind of cancer than, say, in somebody who has lung cancer or colon cancer or pancreatic cancer, much more faster growing, more quickly aggressive cancers typically. So my first point would be that any generalization about cancer as a whole is inaccurate. And it's really important to look at each cancer type, and then even beyond that, to look at each individual person. A certain person is going to have a certain risk factor or, risk for not only development of cancer, but perhaps a worse prognosis with cancer. So, depending on somebody's own individual constellation of risk factors will determine the importance of early kind of being on a good screening and early diagnosis kind of testing route. I think I heard in that question too just some questions about, are there any ways to test for cancer that are just more sort of less invasive and would give us a hint, before the cancer actually shows up. And unfortunately, I don't know of any reliable test to do that yet. There's certainly been some work in that area, and there's some tests that I would consider promising in that regard as early indicators. A lot of these are now genetic kind of ratios and what we call biomarker tests, looking at various markers of inflammation, insulin resistance, these kind of things to help give us a picture, but really those are just going to be pictures of risk. Nothing that I know of yet that diagnoses cancer before it's actually evident.
So not an easy answer, but it sounds like yes and no, and in between, everything in between.
Yes.
Depending
well, I am a Libra, of course, so yes, yes and no is always my answer.
Yes and no. So in some instances, yes, in other instances, no. All right. Here's a person who is undergoing cancer treatment currently and would like your opinion. She says that she is currently on chemo, 8 down, 4 to go, has a colon cancer diagnosis in June, had surgery no chemo. Should I avoid antioxidants during my 2-day active infusion?
Another great question, and there's another book that I wrote called The Definitive Guide to Cancer, and that really is for people in active treatment because we go through each of the chemotherapy agents and which natural agents are indicated, which ones are contraindicated. So the best answer is to look at a reference like that so that you can really understand, given which chemotherapy you're receiving, what may or may not be indicated. Stepping back from that level of detail, what I think a very reasonable and very safe approach is to consider the day or two before your chemotherapy treatment, the days of your chemotherapy treatment, and maybe 1 to 2 days after your chemotherapy treatment as kind of supplement vacation days, and with some notable exceptions, again, which you can match to your specific chemo agents. The value of supplements is generally long-term. Supplements very rarely work acutely, like when you take a supplement this morning, you're going to have a benefit this afternoon. They don't usually work like that, so having a little 4 to 5 day window of no supplements is not going to really impact the overall benefit of the supplements, and it avoids a lot of controversy and confusion with oncologists, some of whom are just reluctant to, engage in that conversation, or not familiar with this whole area and may not be willing to support you in it. So I don't see a problem in avoiding supplements during that time. There's also the reality that most people, when they're getting chemo for that day of and a couple days after, they just don't feel very good, and if they sort of force themselves to take supplements, they start to really just feel nauseous about supplements, and it becomes this really antagonistic relationship with the supplements. So if that starts happening, for sure, just put the supplements away and come back to them in a couple of days.
I appreciate you mentioning your book because it is very confusing for individuals because there are studies that show that some supplements work beautifully with active treatment. For example, the studies on coenzyme Q10 looking at protecting the heart against different types of toxicities from chemotherapies. But the thing is that it's very difficult to do unless you're working with a professional who themselves are quite educated in how to use these supplements intelligently and in a manner that facilitates better care instead of the guesswork that we're sometimes left with of should I or shouldn't I use a specific product at a specific time.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point, Cheryl, and I to carry on that point a little bit, I think if you don't have the benefit of a healthcare practitioner such as a naturopathic doctor or an integrative medical doctor or nurse practitioner to guide you, then maybe use a book that you trust, or a source like Definitive Guide. Not that that's the only one, but something like that. If that doesn't really give you the confidence that you know what decisions to make, then just play it safe and avoid supplements during the days of chemotherapy, and then you can go back at it.
So another yes/no answer. All right, here's another question. Could you speak about the quality of the natural supplement industry, and are there things that we should look for to make sure of quality? I guess they saw that you are, in fact, the Vice President of Quality, so this is a topic you would know a lot about.
Yes. Well, again, another reason why if you can find an integrative healthcare practitioner, it's helpful for a lot of reasons, and one of them is that they tend to source their products very carefully so that they'll use what we call professionally branded products or even retail brands, but that are made by companies with very high standards. So that's one way to assure yourself of good quality. I think that in general there is a continuum of quality on the market. There are good regulations in place, so if you can find companies that follow the dietary supplement regulations, then you can get good quality supplements. One of the things that I've done at Emerson Ecologics is to put together basically a very rigorous quality assurance program. So, and it's open to the public to some extent. If you go to Emerson Ecologics, click on the quality page, you can see some summaries of the companies that have voluntarily agreed to participate in this program, and we've very thoroughly scrutinized their quality and summarize the results for you. And so that's one way to get information. There are some other sources, but it is a little difficult. I honestly think that consumers this is a challenging issue for consumers, and that it's really important for consumers in this regard. Even if you don't can't afford, don't want to see an integrative practitioner for very long, maybe just go once and just for the purpose of getting some brand recommendations, so that you can kind of get at least a start and check out websites like Emerson, and there's some others. ConsumerLabs.com has some information that can be helpful too.
And I also want to make mention of the fact that there's some excellent quality health food stores and who have very professional personnel who take their job seriously. And I don't think that I would just stop at the whatever health food retailer is closest and just decide, well, that's where I'm going to shop now because they're only 6 blocks from my house. I think that you should visit several and find a place where you feel like the staff really understands the issues, where they have a lot of educational offerings to help you make the right selection and some professional guidance. And once you develop that relationship, have a continued ongoing dialogue with the individuals in that store. And also, a lot of health food retailers are starting to employ, either full-time or part-time, a practitioner to come in to help people with what is the best regimen for me with my specific health concern.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent point. Agree 100%.
All right, we have one more question. Excuse me, I'm scrolling through a very small little box. Here we go. I have had breast cancer and take Aromacin. I am not supposed to have soy. What is your opinion on consuming ground flaxseed?
Well, first of all, let me contradict the opinion about soy. The literature on soy has changed really 180 degrees over the last 3 to 4 years, and that's because the better research and consistently now the research has demonstrated that the overall benefit of soy, and I'm speaking specifically of whole soy foods, so soybeans, soy milk, miso, those kind of things, have a cancer preventive effect, including women with a history of breast cancer, including women who are on hormonal therapy, Aromacin, tamoxifen. Soy will actually add cancer prevention to that woman. So soy is no longer kind of on the bad list. And flaxseed is also very important in terms of its role in cancer prevention. And when I speak about cancer prevention, like in your case, it would be with the idea of preventing recurrence or preventing another type of cancer. But flaxseed, even more than flax oil, because fresh flax seeds that you grind up have not only the essential fatty acids, but they also have lignans, and lignans are really good anti-cancer compounds. So you get kind of a double benefit from the flax seeds. And there's some very clear evidence in women that when women consume flax seeds, there's evidence of cancer reversal starting to show up in cancer cells, so that these flax seeds actually do stimulate anti-cancer processes.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that, because there has indeed been a lot of controversy. I think that we've made our way through most of our questions. If you are submitting a question and it didn't make its way through, or if you have questions after the fact, please feel free to contact us. We absolutely want to make sure that all your questions are answered, and we will be glad to answer them via email. So I just want to quickly announce that we have a webinar on December 8th at 1 p.m. Central Time on stopping migraine headaches. And that will be our final presentation for 2011. And please join us again in 2012 as we begin a new educational year full of some of your favorite returning experts as well as new guest presenters. If you are interested in learning more about our webinar series, please come to terrytalksnutrition.com. We have an independent webinar link on that page in which you can not only view upcoming webinars, but you can view archived webinars on health topics in which you might be interested. You can also sign up on the Terry Talks Nutrition website for a free weekly newsletter. Please be assured that we treat your emails with great respect and we do not share them, and we promise to not bombard you with information. However, you will get a weekly newsletter full of some cutting-edge information, especially with regards to dietary supplements and health. For your daily dose of inspiration and natural medicine wisdom, you can follow Terry Lemerond on Twitter at twitter.com/Terry Lemerond, or you can connect to us via Facebook at facebook.com/Terry Talks Nutrition. I'd like to thank Dr. Alschuler once again for a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I hope you can join us again, Dr. Alschuler.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to all of those who took time out of your busy day to learn more about cancer prevention and cancer care and thriving in the face of cancer, we appreciate it and hope that you will join us again. Until we meet again, good health to you. Bye-bye.